You thought you had the last of me. Too bad. Hey everyone, welcome to How to Manufacture at Scale with Particle. If you've been tinkering around with a cool prototype and want to take the next step to scale up, then this is the talk for you. This talk will walk you through moving from prototyping to manufacturing in the Particle ecosystem. But who are we, and why the heck are we the ones to give you this talk? Good question. All right, Mark, who are you?
Yeah, who am I? It's a good question. For this group anyway, my name is Marek Pollux. I lead Particle's Technical Success Program, and I've been at Particle for about 3 years. I think what particularly motivates me to be part of this conversation is that I've spent really a ton of time speaking with Particle's customers, specifically about manufacturing at every stage of development, from small businesses to rapidly scaling enterprise, and a lot of contract manufacturers along the way as well. I use those insights to write the bulk of our manufacturing guide. Definitely shout outs to a number of members of the team who helped as well. But I can definitely take a lot of those insights, condense them, and present them here today for y'all.
Hi, and I'm Colleen Lavin. I do developer advocacy and product management here at Particle. I have a ton of hobby projects, but I've never manufactured anything in my life. In fact, my whole garage is filled with all these hobby projects, and I daydream about turning them into real products. But I've never worked in manufacturing at all. And before I started at Particle, the closest I had been to a production line was a tour of the Jelly Belly factory when I was 10. They do give you like the deformed jelly beans. It is awesome. Highly recommend. But I just always assumed that manufacturing hardware devices at scale was just a bigger, shinier version of the process that I was doing at home. You know, like everyone was like sitting around with their phones to set things up, like getting it ready, just 10 people doing exactly what I was to get things set up. I was wrong. This talk is going to cover everything that would trip me up when moving to a scaled manufacturing process. All right. So here is an example of an ugly prototype. Now, I was originally planning on doing a live demo of how to turn an ugly prototype into a beautifully scaled manufactured product. But my computer found out that I was doing something really important and decided to completely punk out on me today. It's going to be spending a lot of time at the Apple Store. I hope those geniuses have seen something like it. It is bad, guys. So instead, we're going to do less live code and more digging into the documentation and a few screen recordings. Okay. So what do you need to know to go from the ugly prototype to the beautiful, shiny project? This manufacturing process differs greatly from the prototype process. And if you try and replicate it, your current workflow, you're going to have a bad time and also waste a lot of time. So here's our agenda. Number 1, what do you need to know before you start? Number 2, provisioning at scale. And number 3, manufacturing at scale. So let's dig in. One of the main differences between prototyping and manufacturing is the tools that you're going to use. So first up, we've got the Particle Command Line, or CLI, and all of these links that I share on my screen, I'll be posting in the Particle community forums after this talk, so give it a look if you're curious. Now, the Particle Command Line tool connects your devices to the Particle Device Cloud. It's where you run scripts to bulk provision devices, it's where you flash code. You can also access it in Particle Workbench, which is our next one. All right. Workbench, and you can download it here, is Particle's Visual Studio Code extension. It allows for complex project development, and if you've been using Particle's Web IDE, you can export your projects to Workbench using the Web IDE exporter. Like the title implies. It basically turns your sketches into Workbench-ready projects. It's really cool. I highly recommend using it. The main reason for using Workbench over the Web IDE is it lets you build more complex things, it lets you work with others, and it's integrated with Git, so it really helps you scale up. All right, next thing on our list, Particle Console. Now, you have almost certainly used this before to check your device status or something like that. But as a personal developer, you might not have used the product capability. Keeping devices in a product allows for fleet deployment, so you can release firmware to many devices at the same time. It also allows for offline firmware updates and team access. Now that you're not just a solo developer anymore, you need other people to be able to program your devices too. Okay, so next up, you knew this was coming, the documentation. Everybody knows that you're supposed to read the docs. I know it, you know it. There's still a good chance that you're probably not going to do it until something goes wrong. I advise reading the docs as if you're reading a story and not the instructions on the side of a fire extinguisher. Don't wait until you absolutely need to know something because everything is broken. Be proactive and read the entire sections and not just the code samples. If you're a developer who's scaling up your product, the sections that you should really pay attention to are the troubleshooting and manufacturing docs. And here they are right there. Lastly, my favorite part of all of Particle, so favorite that I, in fact, gave a little panel about this earlier, the Particle Community Forums! Yay! All right, the forums are the lifeblood of the Particle community. The users here know their Particle devices, and many of them are developers who made the transition to manufacturing. They've gone through what you're going through now, so they are a perfect resource for you. Check them out. All right. So there are a few things you can do to set yourself up for success. First and foremost, thoroughly test everything before you begin the manufacturing process. Test your devices, test your tools, install it, check it. Try your manufacturing process on a smaller subset of devices, like say 5 or 10, and see if there are any flaws in it. Now, the last one, review all of these steps of the manufacturing process. You need to know this. About 80% of the issues that people have in manufacturing are from when they try and do things out of order. If you do everything in the correct order, you're going to have a much better time. All right. So what is provisioning? What are we doing next? Marek, can you talk to us about provisioning at scale?
Absolutely. And just want to highlight what you just said. Sequence is key. Sequence is absolutely key. And you're going to be presented with more flowcharts than you could possibly imagine over the next couple of slides to really drive in the importance of sequence here. So as Colleen said, there's going to be two main components to this talk on provisioning and manufacturing. And if there's really one point that I totally want to drive home, it's that Particle really conceives of device setup or provisioning as entirely decoupled from the manufacturing line itself. After all, that line should be laser focused on assembly, firmware, flashing, manufacturing tests, etc. We'll talk about provisioning, aka device setup first, and then we'll move into the actual manufacturing sequence. Yeah, next slide, please. So provisioning, what, who, and when. So what does provisioning, aka device setup, mean? Well, in short, basically three things, but really most crucially one thing. And that one thing is getting your devices into a product. In addition to that, that involves activating SIMs on cellular devices so that they'll be able to connect, and then setting a few other kind of custom configurations as well, like groups, names, things like that. But really, the most important part of provisioning here, and what we really are talking about, is adding devices to a product. Colleen touched a little bit on the concept of a product. A product is a way of grouping devices. But above all, at least the way that I come to see it after spending a lot of time, working with various customers, is that a product is really a container for firmware more than it is for devices. Our customers organize production-ready devices by the types of firmware they're going to run on those devices. And each firmware type should have its own product. Once a device is in a product, you can use groups, device groups, to shunt devices towards specific releases. If you're on the growth plan or on the enterprise plan, we recommend adding new devices into the relevant product within your organization. And an organization is just a higher level schema that contains multiple products that meters out ownership and access across multiple users. So once you've added your devices into a product, and we'll show you how to do that, their SIMs are going to activate automatically. That's really, really important to know, and something that's really extra specially nice about working with products in general is that SIM activation is automatic. After you've done this, after you've added devices to products and their SIM activation is being processed, you can do other optional things like naming your devices, placing them into groups, and claiming them. And you may have heard of device claiming, which is a separate thing that is really all about connecting your specific user scope directly to a device. And claiming is cool, and it's really useful in a kind of developer person to device sort of context. But at scale, claiming a device is super optional, and we'd really only ever recommend claiming a device to a persistent generic user, like an organization admin. If you'd like to claim a device for any reason, we recommend doing so last. A claimed device without a product affiliation is just a sandbox device, and doing this out of order can lead to hitting sandbox limits, etc. Okay, so that was a long what, but who and when are a little faster. Who is responsible for adding devices into products, provisioning them? A lot of people make the assumption that this is done by the contract manufacturer, the CM, but that really is not the best way to do it, at least from my experience. It's usually best handled by someone on your operations team. They can do this via the particle console, a script, or via the CLI directly. Colleen's going to demo a simple script that will show how to handle this for someone on your team. And my last point, when does this happen? Let's say you're deploying in the US and manufacturing in the US, and you'd like your devices to connect on the line. We call this manufacturing in region. And if you're manufacturing in region in a context that requires connectivity on the line, we recommend adding your devices into a product no less than, let's say, 24 hours in advance. Out of region manufacturing, however, provisioning can be entirely asynchronous from manufacturing, though of course you want to do it before it arrives at your end user. I have here also flagged the enterprise manufacturing grace period. I'll talk about that in relationship to the when after Colleen does a demo of the process itself. So just really quick before we move on, what's the goal of the provisioning process? It's to add devices into their product or products, which is auto-activating any of their associated SIMs and setting some other configurations thereafter. Okay, process time, flowchart time.
Flowchart time!
Yeah. So before Colleen does a demo, I want to very quickly give a high-level overview of the flowchart of what is taking place here. And you can see the diagram on the right. Particle provides customers who purchase reels, that is group bulk purchases of devices in sets of 50, a CSV file that contains identifier information of those devices. The objective of the provisioning process is to take that CSV and add those devices into your product. And there are three ways that you can do this via the console. That's option one, which can handle a CSV of devices on its own. You can also write a script to handle this and do some kind of cool custom things simultaneously. Or you can also do it using the CLI device by device. And Colleen's going to demonstrate the script-based approach because there's a nice amount of customization there. And it's a really kind of sleek, awesome solution for your ops team. So Colleen, talk us through the scripting side for provisioning.
All right, let's script it all. So we're going to use the demo script provided in the particle documentation to set this up, to set up our hypothetical device here. The provisioning process has 4 scriptable steps listed here, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about what this is before I show you what the actual script looks like. So the first thing, and this is the only one that is not optional, you should definitely, it's required, import to the product. But how do we do that? So you're going to need to provide a product ID, which brings us back to the console. right here next to this little key, you'll see your ID number. And also, if you want to click like one extra click, you'll see it in here. You can see I have a very active product right here, Zero Hole devices. It's beautiful. So that's how you add it to. So you basically need to provide your product ID for that, and that's how you find your product ID. Step 2, you'll need to add it to a group. Now this is optional, but I highly, highly, highly recommend this. Now, device groups allow you to define subsets of your IoT deployment so you can address some devices in a product instead of just all of them. So for instance, let's say that I have 100 devices in my living room and 300 devices in my kitchen, because let's face it, that's what hobbyist developers do. And I really want my kitchen to get this one really, really important update because it's related to humidity sensing. I can do that without getting the living room devices updated. That's only a slight exaggeration to the number of devices in my life. I have a problem, folks. Number 3, you can name the device. Now, this is also highly recommended. Naming a device allows you to identify it easily. A lot of people choose their end product serial number as a device name, so you can identify it. All right, step 4 is claiming the device. This is optional. I don't fully recommend doing this, but some people do prefer it. Now, 2 things that I really want us to watch out for here, not really watch out for, but to keep in mind. Number 1, Cloud API docs. You can use these to find your endpoints. If anyone is like keeping track of how many times I say the word docs in this presentation, I'm sure it's in the thousands. They are very important. The docs will show you the way. Number 2, you've got to keep particle API rate limits in mind. And what are these limits? You have 10,000 calls every 5 minutes. I believe your ability to keep your calls under that. Really, unless you have 10,000 devices, it should not be that difficult. All right. Now let's dig into the actual script. We do have a video there of the bash arguments, but I kind of wanted to show you in our manufacturing docs what it looks like. All right. So this section right here, scripting the provisioning process. Here is the actual script itself, written by my lovely colleague here.
I didn't write this. I think probably Rick Kasaguma or Tim Jackson wrote this, but I'll pretend that I wrote it. Yeah.
My other lovely colleagues who are not here. Oh man. Sorry, not to give you false credit. Written by anyone but Mark. All right. So here's our actual command that we would run. And let's break down what this actually means. So the first thing, claim and group.sh, that is the name of this script up here. And running it, typing that in just basically means that it's going to execute. Everything else is an argument that that script takes. So we've talked about group name. Group name, this is the one that we're giving our hypothetical one. It's called group name, no spaces. Beautiful name, very inspired. What we actually suggest is doing year, month, date, followed by the device count for the shipment. It just makes it a little easier to keep track of. Next, this is access token, which would basically be a string of letters and numbers. It's very long, it's great. What that actually means is that you have permission to use this product, to use this device. And to get this, you just run particle token create. You're gonna have to do this fairly often, especially if you plan on sharing your screen with it, which I originally did. do not publicly share your access tokens, please. Next up, product ID. We went over how to find that. You go to the console, you look at that little key. But finally, device IDs. Now, this is the part that really differs from the setup process that you're doing at home with just 1 or 2 devices. When you make an order of 50 Particles devices, we send you a CSV file with all of the device IDs. So you don't have to scan it one by one to get it into the system. All right. So that is that's the basic breakdown of the arguments. Sorry. All right. Now we could go right now. This would be provisioned, but there's one thing that you really need to keep in mind before running this at all, and one thing that you yourself might not have done as an individual developer. You might not even know this exists. And this, oh no, don't play that video. This is the manufacturing grace period. Mark, what is this? I don't know what it is. I'm an individual developer. I've never been affected by it. Tell us what it is.
Well, you'll be affected by it if you pursue an enterprise contract. So I'll flag that specifically.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So this is a cool billing feature that's an enterprise-only billing feature that allows for a smooth provisioning to manufacturing transition. And this is just a nice graphic that actually represents the enterprise manufacturing grace period, which is documented and everything like that. But really what I want to express is that in an enterprise context, devices are considered billable if they have an active SIM and if they've communicated with the cloud in most contexts. The manufacturing grace period comes into play after a device connects for the first time. While the device is considered billable for the first month after it connects, it is not billable for up to the next 6 months if the device has no further connections, which allows for devices pending shipment to avoid becoming billable. And you can see how this is especially useful for customers who manufacture in region, for example, for whom connectivity testing is really important on the line. So yeah, cool stipulation to add to the provisioning process to kind of, I guess, add into the calculus of how you schedule provisioning vis-a-vis manufacturing. But let's talk about manufacturing. That's what everyone is here to watch. Yeah. So we'll start with a kind of alignment on the core principles of QC on the line, and then we'll move to the actual process when it comes to particle devices.
All right.
Next slide. Awesome. So just very quickly, I want to speak to quality control on the floor. Our most successful customers have built exhaustive QC functions at their CMs. This is inclusive to basic things like visual and electrical PCBA inspection, pre and post final assembly, to something else that I'd really like to recommend. And again, something that I've seen really put into place in the most kind of successful CM infras, which is manufacturing test firmware. This isn't useful just for like IQC testing of the particle board, but for testing of the full assembly. It should exercise all of your build's key functions, your sensors, your actuators, everything, including cloud functions if you're manufacturing in region. You can also add some basic RF testing for out-of-region CMs. There's like an AT plus U test command you can use against the antenna UFL connector, but this isn't really strictly required as it's incorporated into the outgoing QC process. But most importantly, like we definitely recommend testing manufacturing test firmware on the line and logging successes and failures into an internal database. Since all particle devices have a QR data matrix on the label, it's easy to associate devices with any logs that are produced in this context. So more flowcharts. Let's talk about the process. Cool. So there are 2 methods we want to talk about today, CLI and JTAG. So using the CLI is both the easiest to batch, but also the most complex to rig up, as you can see on the flowchart. But using JTAG is contingent on often expensive tools. So we'll demo the CLI part, which connects simply via USB. So Colleen, can you show these folks how to use a CLI script, I guess, or abstracted little sections of a script to flash firmware to a factory fresh device?
Yes. All right. Time for our extremely live CLI demo. Yay! This is definitely happening in real time. All right. So first thing you need to do is place your device in device firmware update mode. That's particle update or particle USB DFU. All right. So we've done that. Next up, you need to update your device's firmware with particle update. So this takes about 30 seconds, and we're going to dive into why you do this. We are constantly improving the firmware for devices, pushing new security patches, and giving new features. It's very important that you have your devices up to date, so you know that you're safe, and you know that your device is really going to work every time. All right. After this, we're going to be flashing some test firmware, and that's but we have to first right now particle USB DFU. We go back to that. Next up, particle flash the device. Now we are going to be flashing some test firmware. You might not do this if you're doing it at home, but in a manufacturing environment, you should definitely flash firmware that tests the functionality of the device. All right, it was a success. Who would have thought? Next up, we have to have the device start listening. It's now in listening mode. And then finally, we go to particle USB setup and flag that as done. That means our setup is complete. You are good to go. All right, and that is the manufacturing process. Now, you'll notice that these steps are very easy to put into a script. It's a completely scriptable process, and if anyone wants to see an example of this script, reach out to me on the forums, and I will provide you one. All right.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen. Do you mind going to the previous slide just to kind of quickly touch over the high-level overview here?
Yeah.
So just to kind of quickly restate what Colleen just said, we recommend really starting using the data matrix on the device with a QR scanner to associate any test logs that'll be produced from your manufacturing test firmware. Then we recommend using Particle Update, which Colleen opted to use to flash the latest GA system firmware to the device, though definitely we recommend thoroughly testing against any device OS changes, of course, before releasing in any kind of scale. We then recommend testing, flashing test and then manufacturing test and then production app firmware to the device and clearing the setup flag with the CLI so the device boots out of setup mode once this is all complete. So this is the CLI flow. And again, as Colleen says, it's really easy to put this into a simple batch script and have it pause while you wait for device to enter certain modes, which can be verified by the operator. Really simple to handle. However, there's an alternative which is much faster using JTAG. Can you advance to that slide? Yeah, so JTAG is an order of magnitude faster than USB CLI-based flashing, and it can also be executed on multiple devices simultaneously. But of course, it does require JTAG tooling and software, which a lot of CMs do already have. We've done our part on Particle's end to make this as simple as possible. Our documentation team, aka the inimitable Rick Kazuma, who's been very, very much celebrated over the past day. He put together an easy hex editor and export tool at docs.particle.io/tool, which allows for the generation of a complete image alongside a number of nice features, like the ability to flash system firmware and then app firmware. You can see the firmware upload section at the bottom there simultaneously, all in one go. And it also gives you the ability to auto-clear the device setup flag as part of the image itself. JTAG is much, much faster, and there are a number of tools that you use for JTAG that are likely already available to your CM without much of a headache: OpenOCD, Nordic NRF-Prog, SegerTools, SDLink, JLink, etc. And Rick has also created a web interface that you can use for testing. This tool is still in the experimental phase, but it's a great resource for JTAG flashing outside of the line experimentally. Again, available at the same docs resource, a page that I hope you all have bookmarked. It allows you to really go through the steps, grab a hex image and flash the device easily and get a sense of what this looks like. Yeah, cool. Okay, let's move quickly to the next slides. Just some brief caveats to touch on. You'll note that the Particle mobile app is not recommended for manufacturing at scale. Why? Well, the mobile app was really designed for single user purposes, and it doesn't support product functionality. It uses the legacy claiming system to interact with devices, and at present, we don't plan to add product functionality into the current mobile app, as this is not really what it's designed to do right now. You'll also note that we don't explicitly recommend using OTA on the line, and this is mostly just because most folks tend to manufacture out of region. And OTA is definitely a very reasonable way to retrieve application firmware in the field, but maybe not the best way to flash manufacturing test firmware to your build on the line. And finally, just a very simple note on end user Wi-Fi credentialing. This is not typically something that we recommend to have happen on the line or in firmware, but rather is something that's best handled by generating a mobile application that handles credentialing at the end user Wi-Fi level. So back to Colleen for some notes on troubleshooting. I see we have some questions, so I'm excited to get to those as well. Colleen.
All right. So in an ideal world, nothing would ever go wrong and your laptop and live demo would work perfectly every time. But we live in this world, and you will likely face issues from time to time. When you run into issues or problems, there are a few things that you can do to fix things. First off, you go to the troubleshooting tools we highlighted earlier, specifically Device Restore, Device or Cloud Debug, and Status LED. Cloud Debug and Device Restore are the ones that are likely going to help you every time. But if you find that they are not the solution this time, the next thing that you should do, my favorite, go to community.particle.io and search your problem. Like, for instance, CLI issues. Then you look through and see, hey, has someone had the same issue as me? If they haven't, make a new post. You type in the title, find a relevant category, and then describe in detail what's going on and ask for help. There's a good chance that the community's seen something like this before, or we have a hunch. Now, if all else fails, go to support.particle.io and submit a ticket. All right. So does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I see a couple questions in the chat, so I'm happy to address them. The first is a question about products. The question is, are products included in the free plan? And there's like a note about adding devices may result in increased device cloud costs when adding a device to a product. So yes, products are supported in the free plan. You are able to use products in the free plan, and I think there are. I don't even know if there is even Fleet Vitals limitation on them. I think they are like fully supported products in the free plan. What you don't get is access to an organization, which is essentially a collection of products that are shared by a kind of hierarchy of users. But yeah, this is like the great opportunity to start playing around and testing products for that next level. So yes, products are supported at the free plan level. And then I see a question from Drew Bell. I'm hoping this is the Drew Bell, in which case, hello. How recommended or required is particle USB setup done? At this point, it is required. It is required for Gen 3 devices for borons and argons. Otherwise, the devices will boot into listening mode. There's a long history behind this particular command, which I can definitely regale you with at some point. But at present, this is currently a requirement. It is a simple CLI command, or it is a like immediate push it into the hex image JTAG flash situation. Hey, Drew. Yeah. So that's the answer there. So it's currently required for Gen 3. There is some talk about changing the way that the setup flag functions. I will definitely keep you posted about that.
All right. I don't see any more questions, but if anyone has anything, this is your time to speak. All right. I don't think we've got anything else. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm really glad you showed up, and these are some excellent questions that you submitted.